Let's say you do that, okay? If you were in a burning building, you can either save 2 embryos or 1 newborn baby. Which you rather saving?
The newborn baby.
Why?
Oh, if it's 100% in the embryos.
You would save 2 embryos over 1 newborn baby. You let the newborn baby burn alive.
I would save the 2 over the 1.
How old are you?
I'm 19.
Do you support Trump?
Yeah.
Election held today, Harris versus Trump. Who would you rather vote for?
I think I'd still vote for Trump.
Okay, and what's your birth year?
2006. I was born December 20th.
Okay, and why do you support Trump?
I support him mostly because of my conservative views, and I feel like he aligns with a good majority of them that the other candidates didn't. And whenever you're voting, you kind of have to vote for someone who has a higher possibility of winning, and there's typically only 2 or 3 people that even have like a solid chance, just depending on funding and everything. And he had the highest probability for a Republican candidate for winning.
Okay. So you say he has the highest probability of winning for a Republican candidate. So, why is he better than Harris? Is the real question.
I just feel like he has more conservative and I don't want to really say religious points of view because I know he is religious, but also some of his actions. Like, I don't support him as a human being, like the way he acts morally. However, the way he's acted in his presidency, I like.
Okay, so you don't think he's acted morally, but you do think that you agree with him more on conservative values. Okay, so what conservative value?
His opinions on abortion.
Okay. What opinion on abortion?
Well, he's
That
an
he wants to
abortion
make it illegal?
abolitionist. Yeah.
Okay. Why do you think abortion should be illegal?
It's more so like for me, elective abortions I think should be illegal
Why?
because I just find it immoral to end a human life when like there's no point in using that as a form of birth control when there's so many other options that are available that have very very good like and very consistent rates of being a good contraceptive.
Okay. So you know that most abortions are a result of failed contraceptives. Over 51% of abortions are because of failed contraceptives. So people are using contraceptives. It just inevitably leads to circumstances where it fails. Secondly, we just want to consider that for individuals who are getting abortions, right? We're talking most people get abortions in the context of like an abortion pill, for example. Do you think it's valuable at that early points in the pregnancy?
I think if it's something where you could just take a plan B instead, no, because like you have the
Let's say
ability
Plan
to
B
take,
doesn't work.
but you know how like rare that is for Plan B to not work if you're using it properly in like
Yeah,
that 48-hour window.
yeah, but inevitably in a society with hundreds of millions of people, there's going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people this will be applicable to, even if it's applicable to a very small portion of
I
people.
just don't see the value in it if it's such a small portion of people.
What? Wait, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, it applies to them? You don't care? Okay, so you could say the same thing about abortion. Abortion as a whole.
Also,
It makes up less than 1% of the population. It makes up less than, what, 0.3% of the population, right? On a yearly basis. So you wouldn't care about the amount of abortions that are happening because it's proportionally unlikely to happen. That's why
but it
51%
happens.
of abortions are a result of failed contraceptives, because the proportional likelihood of contraceptives failing, right, inevitably on top of the likelihood in which you'd get someone pregnant, right, is infinitesimally small. And even so, there still produces a greater proportion of people who are going to end up failing and still becoming pregnant, or the birth control fails and they still become pregnant.
Yeah, but isn't like a third of Gen Z not here today because of abortions?
I don't know where you'd get that statistic from,
I've been seeing it
but who
online and I
cares?
looked it up and it was like that's a large population of like the group of Gen Z.
I'm gonna be honest with you. How much do I give a shit?
But those
Absolutely
are
zero.
human
Why? Because
lives.
they never were sentient.
Why does that matter?
Why does that matter? Because they're people once they're sentient. They're not valuable prior to being sentient. I'm not going to value a non-sentient embryo more than a sentient pregnant person that will literally be forced to suffer to go through a pregnancy in order to be able to meet your standard of value of caring about a embryo. Like, I just think that's crazy. I think it's crazy that maternal mortality and infant mortality have gone up because people prioritize embryos more than they do pregnant women. It's crazy to
I
me.
don't think it's valuing the embryo more than the pregnant woman. I feel like it's giving them the same level of value. Like
Yeah,
he wouldn't
that's
end
insane
the
in of
life of
itself. Let's say you do that, okay? If you were in a burning building, you can either save 2 embryos or 1 newborn baby. Which you rather saving?
the newborn baby.
Why? You said you value them equally.
Yeah, I value them equally.
Okay,
However, there's still the percentage that the embryo cannot like come to full term, and it would like
let's assume that it's 100%.
Oh, if it's 100%, then the embryos.
You would save 2 embryos over 1 newborn baby. You'd let the newborn baby burn alive.
I would save the 2 over the 1.
The 2 embryos.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
was just on Dean's Live when we were talking about this.
okay, well that's a nuts thing to do. That's a nuts thing to do. You want to know why that's nuts? Because they will never have an experience. So you're gonna let that baby be tortured because you want to save a future experience of something that has never existed yet?
But you said it has a 100% chance of existing.
Yeah. Like if you were to go back in time and you were to ask or you were to tell your parents like, "Oh, if you choose not to date this person, this kid will never exist." Right? Do you think it would be immoral if they chose not to date that person anymore?
That's completely different because there's not the implantation.
But
and it's
you
not
know for a
fertilized.
fact, 100% certainty, that if they dated that person, inevitably would lead to children existing because you're from the future.
Well, that's completely different because it's not fertilized. Life
Oh,
begins
okay.
at
So you care
conception.
about it once there's fertilization. Why?
Because life begins at conception.
Do you think it's murder to pull the plug on an individual in your family that's brain
I
dead?
feel as though if they're brain dead, then they've already passed in that
But they still have
sense.
cellular life. So I thought you value cellular life.
Well, that's completely different. That's at the end of their life, at the end of their experience.
Oh, okay, so you value experience.
Well, everyone has their own experience, but yeah.
Yeah,
The
but so
individual
if you
experience
get
is
an
important.
abortion, they'll never have an experience ever. So if you the value that you have for people ends at the point in which sentience ends, then wouldn't the value begin once sentience begins?
No,
Why not?
because life begins at conception, like
Yeah, but you don't care
fertilization.
about cellular life because you don't value it when they're brain dead.
Because it's
You value
different
the
when they're brain dead.
experience. So if your value is based upon when the experience ends, then why isn't your value based upon when the experience began?
Because I find there to be a larger difference between that. Because typically, if you're talking about someone like pulling the plug and whatnot, you're talking about someone who is brain dead and is like of an older age
But they're not
category,
brain
like
alive yet.
60s, 70s.
If you stop caring about it once it's brain dead, why don't you start caring about it once it's brain alive rather than just cellular life?
You know when like brain function begins, like in the womb?
Well, in order to produce the brain life of a subjective experience, it doesn't happen until 20 through 24 weeks in the
Do
womb.
you think that abortion should stop at that point?
Do I think abortion
Like
should
with your
stop?
reasons?
Well, I don't think that there'd be any reason in having a ban from a legal perspective because I don't think it will prevent lethal elective abortions after that point. Because like they're practically non-existent. But I do think it would prevent people who do deserve it in the situations in which there are exceptions. So it would just have more risks than benefits. Now, if we could suppose that there would be some sort of perfect law that could exist with perfect exceptions, sure. But I just don't think that's possible.
Why would that not be possible? Like I understand like we don't live
I
in a
don't think we
perfect
could. I don't
society
think we
and
could develop
everything, but
perfect exceptions because there are conditions where people might not be able to prove that this would be applicable to them, or we might not know that it's applicable to them yet. Yet they still should have the ability to get access to an abortion because any time in which we would be able to identify, there should be no question of whether or not they should be able to get access to it. Because that question in of itself can cause them to get into worse circumstances, which inevitably can lead to them having a higher likelihood of maternal mortality or infant mortality.
okay. So like you don't believe in like a certain cutoff from like
Not
abortions,
legally,
like
but morally, yes, there is. With elective abortions after sentience, morally, it's wrong, but there should be no legal cutoff because the legal cutoff will just inevitably restrict people in situations where they need it, where the exception should be in place, rather than restricting people who are getting elective lethal abortions after that point.
morally where do you stand on it?
I already
'Cause I
told
know
you,
you said, like,
morally
legally.
after sentience in elective circumstances, it's wrong, but there's no justification for it to be illegal because there is no benefit to passing that law. There are only risks that I.
And what risks would those be? Like,
Wow. How many times? I think I've told you multiple times at this point. Are you listening?
yeah, I'm listening.
What are the risks? Well, the risks are the situations where people who, in those exceptions, do deserve it, but aren't going to be able to get access to it because there's some sort of process of determining whether or not they apply for the exception. Does that make sense?
Well,
The
yeah,
risk
and
will
if
still
they
be
don't,
present,
like,
but they weren't able to meet that criteria. So they still should have been able to get access to it, but they won't because we had some sort of criteria to prevent people who don't meet the exception.
but there's risks with everything. Like, it just depends on the, I guess, level of the risk itself.
Yeah, and there are more risks with imposing a law than there would be with not impose. They just left. Okay. Let's just go on the next person. Only send a guest